Our story begins as he pulls a necklace from beneath the bed, only for a mysterious bullet chat message to flash before his eyes. If you want to live, drop it. The warning claims that anyone who looks at the necklace will have their eyes carved out as specimens, and any hand that touches it will be hacked into pieces. He lets go immediately, turning toward the kitchen for a drink of water, but just as he reaches for the cup in front of him, another message flickers into view, warning that this cup belongs exclusively to the boss's husband. To touch it is a death sentence. Anyone who dares will be tossed into the sea as shark bait tonight. He reaches his hand toward the mug, a bold move, it seems, only to bypass it and grab the glass behind it instead. Suddenly, the sparse messages on his screen explode into a frantic wave of comments. One viewer admits they nearly thought he was a goner right then and there. Others remark that he doesn't act like a newcomer at all, wondering if some high-level pro is here just to crush the competition. They joke about his looks, asking if such a handsome player could really be a smurf. Meanwhile, he simply sips his water, eyes fixed on the floating text. Just then, the female boss descends the stairs, searching the room frantically for something before lining everyone up in the living room. She announces that whoever finds her missing necklace first will receive a grand prize tonight. To be honest, that prize is likely something to fear. The group begins to search with trembling hands, hardly daring to breathe. They all know the stakes are higher than they seem. Every person there is terrified of accidentally provoking the boss and triggering some horrific hidden mechanism within the house. Just yesterday, a man who couldn't keep his eyes to himself was blinded by the boss and dragged away by a monster. No one knows if he's even still alive. Our protagonist keeps his head down, avoiding the boss's gaze while scanning the active chat for clues. The messages continue to scroll by, filled with viewers who seem to know exactly what is about to unfold. Some fans admit that even though they know she will likely kill them all, they can't help but admire the boss's lethal beauty. He realizes that if she actually kills him, he won't be around to be unhappy about it. Things are looking grim, as he must find the secret path. Only by uncovering this level's hidden stage can he hope to survive the night. These stages are randomized, and no one knows the rules. And so, he is left with a daunting task, figuring out how to trigger a secret that no one else can see. A hidden stage? He scrolls through the bullet chat, desperately searching for useful information, but finds only endless messages of sister, love me one more time, and brother. The disaster unfolding is serious, yet the chat is filled with useless fluff like his legs aren't just legs, or spring water by the river. Suddenly, a pair of long legs and high heels appears before him. The boss stands right there, her presence looming over him as he remains on the floor. She explains that the necklace was the first birthday gift Achin ever gave her. If he found out she lost it, she worries he might stop speaking to her. She doesn't want to break his heart. To be honest, this is the first time we've heard her speak with such a gentle, almost fragile tone. She continues, saying the first person to find it will be the lucky winner among them. She promises a grand reward for the one who succeeds, a prize that sounds far too good to be true. It seems everyone wants to be that lucky soul. After all, the winner will be allowed to rest for the remainder of the night. They can rest until the game ends. The others begin to whisper excitedly, wondering if this is the shortcut they've been praying for. Isn't this just blatant cheating? To pass the level without completing any other tasks sounds like the ultimate hidden stage. But then, a realization hits him. Could there be someone else here who can see the chat? A blonde-haired man suddenly shoves him aside and steps forward with unearned confidence. He approaches the boss and performs a dramatic gentleman's bow. Our protagonist, caught off guard, loses his balance and falls to the floor. The blonde man addresses her as Master, claiming he has long heard the stories of the eternal, unwavering love between her and her husband. He says the story inspired him deeply. He claims it is a great honor to clean her house, and he never expected to become the lucky one she mentioned. He acts as if he has already won, wearing a smug smile that suggests he knows something the others don't. He tells her he is different from the other newcomers. He claims that as soon as he realized such a precious token of her love was missing, he searched every single corner of the room with meticulous care. And finally, he says he found it. He produces the necklace, claiming it had accidentally fallen under the bed. Yes, the very same necklace our protagonist was warned not to touch. He assures her that before bringing it to her, he inspected it thoroughly to ensure there wasn't a single scratch on it. He presents it, boasting that he is returning it to her hands in perfect condition. He waits for his reward, but the atmosphere shifts instantly. The boss's voice turns ice cold as she asks who gave him permission to touch it. Suddenly, rows of white candles erupt from the ground before his eyes. A message flickers across the screen. This self-proclaimed genius is likely finished. Apparently, he is a well-known player on the horror leaderboard. Just a few days ago, he was boasting on social media about his high ranking and his supposed expertise in this specific realm. He claimed he had researched this dungeon in advance, calling all newcomers useless and swearing he would be the first one to clear it. The chat erupts in laughter at his arrogance. Did he really think that telling a cheesy love story would win over a horror game boss? To be honest, he seems to have mistaken a survival nightmare for a dating simulator. But the boss's reaction is far from romantic. She mutters that it's filthy, absolutely disgusting. It turns out she utterly loathes it when anyone touches her personal belongings. With a sudden, violent movement, the boss kicks the blonde man, sending him crashing to the floor in a heap. She sneers at him, telling him not to touch her things with his filthy hands. She asks if he truly doesn't realize how repulsive he is. However, she adds that the grand prize she promised is still his. His reward? He will be the one to prepare tonight's dinner. As the bullet chat scrolls frantically, the clock strikes 9. The boss descends from the attic, her presence chilling the room. She is soaking wet, and the skin on her hands appears red and swollen, as if from repeated, obsessive scrubbing. She leads the group to the dining table and asks a simple, terrifying question: who wants to volunteer to serve the late-night snack? The chat warns that if a server's hand shakes from fear and spills even a single drop of soup, they are as good as dead. Spectators are already placing bets, shouting that there is no way a newcomer like our protagonist will survive until the end. He watches the messages with growing tension. His mind is racing as he rests his chin on his hand, lost in deep thought. He wonders how he can safely survive the night while inhabiting the identity of this stranger. It is a heavy burden to carry. After all, he doesn't belong in this world where people climb the social ladder by surviving deadly dungeons. Just a few days ago, his biggest worry was being unable to pay rent and having to sleep under a bridge. And yet, here he is, standing inside a steaming, ancient castle. It is a strange upgrade, to say the least. He no longer has to fight dogs for food and can sink into a soft mattress. To him, this dangerous life feels almost like heaven. In fact, he was even starting to look forward to tomorrow. Suddenly, a cold, piercing gaze locked onto him. It was her. She told him that since he was sitting the closest, he would be the one to serve the meal tonight. Being short had always been a disadvantage for him. He was constantly bullied and pushed to the very back of every line. By the time he reached the front at the shelter, the food was either gone or reduced to scraps. But things had changed. Since arriving in this world, he made it a habit to sit as close to the food bucket as possible during every meal. He never imagined that this survival instinct would lead to him being appointed as the official server for the night. The viewers in the chat are impressed, noting how remarkably calm this handsome newcomer seems to be. They cheer him on, desperately hoping he manages to survive until the very end of this nightmare. One viewer jokes about waiting for him to get out, mentioning rumors that he is a pretty boy backed by a powerful female player. At first, many didn't believe the rumors, but his current composure is certainly making them reconsider. In reality, he was simply frozen in shock. If he admitted he was actually scared to death, would anyone even believe him? The boss warns him, 1 scoop per person. Her husband's soup is precious, and if he dares to spill even a single drop, he knows exactly what the consequences will be. Based on the frantic messages in the bullet chat, it isn't hard to guess. If his hand shakes, he will likely face the freezing ocean and the jaws of sharks. In this dungeon, death is very real. As a poor newcomer with no background, he can't afford a death immunity card. If he fails now, it's all over. Failure means true, permanent death. After spending a few hours inhabiting this body, he has realized something quite unfortunate. The original owner of this body was just as broke as he was. Resigned to his fate, he walks toward the steaming bucket. A few chunks of meat float on the surface of the reddish-brown soup. Upon closer inspection, the hair on the meat hasn't been removed. As the broth boils, several black hairs drift in and out of sight. Everyone else sits at the table, trembling in pure terror. He gathers his courage and dips the ladle into the bucket. To his horror, a severed, notched ear floats to the surface. As he gets closer, a stench so foul it hits him like a physical blow begins to make his stomach churn violently. He wonders, quite reasonably, why he has to witness such a gruesome sight right at dinner time. Wait, something is wrong. We notice that this part of the story isn't supposed to go like this at all. It seems the later stages have been altered to prevent cheating, and he watches the people in front of him carefully. He forces down the rising bile as he stares at the pot of floating organs. After all, he's done far worse to survive. In his past, he took every odd job available, slaughtering pigs, chickens, sheep, and cattle to earn a hot meal. The bucket contains a mix of pig and cow innards, and he realizes the blonde man from earlier might still be alive. He lifts the ladle and begins distributing the soup bowl by bowl, appearing as steady and calm as an old professional. The viewers are stunned, thinking his composure is almost too impressive for a newcomer. If they didn't know better, they'd suspect he could actually see the comments they're writing right now. One viewer jokes about the rumors of liking him, playfully clarifying that the feelings are very much real. Others tell the dreamers to snap out of it, reminding everyone of the high stakes involved in this trial. If he actually survives this S-rank dungeon, he will instantly become a legendary figure in their world. It has been a long time since anyone cleared an S-rank trial, and the prize pool has grown to a staggering amount. He would emerge as a billionaire, leaving everyone else far behind, if he can just stay focused. The thought of being a billionaire crosses his mind as he calmly asks if anyone would like a second helping. Not only did he serve the soup without a single mistake, but he's now looking for more work to justify his presence. After finishing the task, having had nothing but water all day, he picks up his own bowl and begins to drink. He gulps it down without hesitation, much to the surprise of everyone watching. It turns out the taste is like stinky tofu, foul to the nose, but surprisingly delicious once you actually try it. He even thinks to himself that a bit of cilantro and green onion would make it perfect, while the others watch him in pure horror. Soon, the sound of retching fills the air, although our young protagonist completed the task the female boss gave him. There are only 10 minutes left before the day ends. To be honest, time is running out faster than anyone expected. If no one manages to find the hidden level before the clock strikes 0, then everyone here is as good as dead. We see the tension rise as those final 10 minutes begin to tick away. He looks around desperately, hoping to find a useful clue to stay alive. Deep down, he isn't ready to die just yet. The boss suddenly screams that this was a tonic soup her husband worked hard to brew, yet they all dared to spit it out. She asks if they are looking for death, declaring that she is furious and the consequences will be severe. The only way out, she claims, is if someone among them can earn her dear husband's forgiveness. Otherwise, they will all end up as the very ingredients floating in that soup to pay off their debt. The boss looks toward the forbidden, mysterious room upstairs with eyes full of deep affection, and the restaurant instantly descends into chaos. The crowd is like ants on a hot pan, gazing anxiously toward the stairs, hoping the boss's husband might actually come down. Suddenly, a man with a sturdy build stands up and charges toward the upper floor in a desperate gamble. Several monsters appear out of nowhere, surrounding him and tearing him apart bit by bit, leaving only a bloodstain as proof he ever existed. The survivors panic, wondering what to do. One cries out that he cannot die yet, as he has a family to support. He mentions his elderly parents and young children, and how his father is still waiting for him in a hospital bed. It is a tragic sentiment, but in a place like this, sentiment rarely buys you a second chance. Everyone understands that if a solution isn't found immediately, the only thing waiting for them is a cold death. The viewers wonder if it's all over, feeling a bit disappointed that no one has found the hidden stage yet. One viewer even remarks that it's a pity, as they were quite fond of our protagonist's looks and composure. After all, they chose the most difficult S-rank dungeon, and the viewers truly want to see someone conquer it. The boss's smile widens with a bloodthirsty gleam in her eyes as she grips a dinner knife tightly. She drags the blade across the table, creating a piercing screech that makes the already terrifying atmosphere even more unbearable. Sitting in the corner of the table, our protagonist gazes toward the upper floor as a bold idea begins to form in his mind. He speaks up, suggesting that in a sea of sharks, there will always be foolish little fish that get eaten. He tells her that if she feeds everyone to the sharks just because the soup wasn't perfect today, then there will be no one left to test for poison. He reminds her that he must ensure her safety above all else. He calls her dear and asks if they hadn't agreed that she would never have to step into the kitchen again. He praises her hard work and tells her she should stop cooking for these cowards altogether. He claims her cooking is for him alone, as they aren't worthy, and suggests that from now on, they should just dine together. We have to admit, this move was absolutely brilliant. To be honest, it was a gamble no one else would dare. And so, against all odds, he managed to survive the first day, which was riddled with traps at every turn. He had made it through the initial trial, but peace is a rare commodity in this world. Suddenly, a disheveled man with a thick beard rushes forward and delivers a heavy punch to our protagonist's stomach. The metallic taste of blood rises in his throat as the man screams, accusing him of cheating right in front of everyone. The man finds it impossible to believe that a newcomer participating in his first dungeon could solve an S-rank mystery. He demands the answers for the remaining levels, threatening that our protagonist won't live to see another sunrise otherwise. The crowd behind the man glares with hostility, and suddenly, a rain of kicks and punches begins to fall upon him. They are clever enough to avoid his face, and as he feels his strength fading, he wonders if he truly won't survive the day. The man mocks him, noting how he was absent during the work and wasn't even looking for the necklace properly. The man claims that when the blonde-haired boy found the necklace, our protagonist was standing right there, guiding him toward his doom. It was a calculated move, or so the bearded man believes, to eliminate the competition. He demands the answers immediately, insisting that no one should keep the secrets to themselves. The crowd agrees, shouting for him to speak. They want him to surrender everything he knows, and as it turns out, he is more than willing to comply. You want the answers to the levels? He asks calmly. Fine, I'll tell you exactly what you want to know. The viewers are stunned. We have to wonder, did he actually find a way to cheat the system? Some of the onlookers feel a flicker of pity, seeing the blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. Though, to be perfectly honest, the disheveled look only seems to make him appear more like a tragic hero. He whispers that there are too many eyes and ears around, so for safety's sake, he will only share the secret with one person. He beckons the bearded man closer, telling him to lean in so no one else can overhear the revelation. The man frowns, claiming he didn't hear a word and demanding that he repeat it. Our protagonist simply sighs. He points out that he spoke quite clearly, but the man erupts in anger, shouting that if he says he didn't hear it, then he didn't hear it. The man tells him to stop playing games, but our protagonist suddenly collapses against a nearby window and falls unconscious. The man moves to strike again, but the crowd pulls him back. They suspect he's trying to kill the boy to keep the answers all for himself. They accuse him of wanting to beat the boy to death so that he becomes the only one left with the secrets of the dungeon. It seems they believe he wants to monopolize the prize money, and in this world, greed is a powerful motivator. Suddenly, a chilling voice announces, "Congratulations to the survivors for making it through the first day. Please return to your beds and close your eyes. Prepare for the arrival of a new day. Good night, you lucky souls." A truly unsettling lullaby, if we ever heard one. Drawing from his experience with horror games, he knows that once the midnight bell tolls, one must find the nearest bed immediately. You must lie down, close your eyes, and remain absolutely silent. Do not open them, or the next second could be your last. The supernatural entities begin to manifest right before our eyes, emerging from the shadows as the hunt begins. A voice sings out, mocking and sweet, telling the little rabbits to be good and open up their doors. It wants to see who is still awake in the middle of the night, searching for anyone who dared to open their eyes. The teacher has arrived to conduct an inspection, and she is looking very closely indeed. She wanders through the room, wondering aloud where everyone could possibly be hiding. She asks whose little eyes are staring at the teacher, a question no one in their right mind would want to answer. While everyone else hides under their covers trembling, our protagonist had already dived into the nearest bed the moment the bell tolled. Unfortunately, that bearded man from before is right there too. They begin to shove and struggle against one another. The man manages to push him away and quickly hides in a nearby cabinet, leaving our hero exposed and with nowhere to go. He looks up only to lock eyes with a female entity. She activates a light stone and begins sprinting directly toward him. His body freezes in place while his mind races at 1,000 miles per hour. Suddenly, she cries out, asking where her husband has gone. She claims she simply cannot sleep without him by her side. To be honest, it's a rather terrifying sentiment. We might think the arrival of the female boss saved them, but in reality, they are both in more danger than ever. One might assume her presence means safety, but that is a dangerous mistake. We must remember what happened earlier. He had previously claimed to be her husband, Achin. However, looking back at the records of this dungeon since the very first day, no one has ever actually seen this entity's husband. Based on his extensive experience with horror games, it seems he might just be a lucky newcomer who happened to stumble upon a hidden level by sheer chance. From where we're sitting, it looks like he won't survive the night. He realizes he is backed into a corner. Whether he stands or falls, he decides he might as well risk everything and face these ghosts head-on. She leans in, asking why he is there and questioning if he is truly her husband or just an imposter. She demands to know why, if he is truly her husband, he isn't sleeping in their room instead of this filthy, chaotic south ward. She reminds him that they both share a hatred for filth and a deep dislike of being touched by others. He quickly improvises, telling her that every night they play a little game before bed just to keep things interesting. Deep down, he knows he's using every ounce of acting skill he learned back at the orphanage just to survive this moment. He claims today was hide and seek, though she notes with a chilling smile that he was 10 seconds slower than usual. Since he was 10 seconds late, she decides he must be punished 10 times, a terrifying prospect, to be sure. Once the punishment is over, she tells him it's time to leave this place and return to their private room. As they head toward the room, we see the viewers in the chat going wild over these supposed bedtime games. He pleads with the chat to stop their wild comments before the whole stream gets banned for inappropriate content. He tries to keep things professional, reminding everyone to stay wholesome, but the situation is far from calm. He recalls that the game developers originally designed this female boss as a cold, elegant, and bloodthirsty ultimate antagonist. However, she doesn't seem to fit that description at all right now, regardless of her supposedly cruel and violent nature. The viewers are obsessed with the dynamic between the soft-hearted boss and the pitiful young man who could snap at any moment. Watching the comments, his face twitches. They think he's a wolf in sheep's clothing, but he is genuinely terrified. He knows that if he doesn't protect himself, no one will, especially after losing his parents in that tragic accident. The court had placed him with his aunt and uncle, where he grew up feeling like nothing more than a burden. From a very young age, he learned to read people's expressions and please them just to survive the day. It's ironic, really, that the very survival skills he hated learning are now saving his life over and over in this strange world. He follows behind the female boss, quietly trying to decipher what she is actually thinking. He wonders why she didn't expose him just now, and what on earth he will say if he meets her real husband. He suspects she knows he's an imposter and is leading him upstairs to torture him in private. He even begins planning his defense. He hopes to use his silver tongue to appeal to the emotions of the female boss and her husband, begging them for his life. While he is lost in these frantic thoughts, the door to the mysterious room swings open, and he prepares to beg for mercy. Suddenly, a voice calls out to Chun, claiming to have finally found him after all this time. What greets his eyes is a strangely familiar room, where a photo frame sits quietly upon a white bedside table. The photo shows a family of 3 with radiant smiles, the only photo he has with his parents, and his eyes begin to redden. He quickly begins to scan every corner of the room, yet he finds that the space is entirely empty. It's quite strange, really. He wonders where her husband could possibly be hiding. Meanwhile, the chat is exploding with excitement, convinced that the romance between them is finally becoming real. Some viewers even begin to speculate if he truly is the long-lost husband of this formidable female boss. One viewer claims there is only one truth. This newcomer isn't a player at all, but an NPC belonging to this world. He pulls himself up and takes the initiative, pinning the boss down, but just as he prepares to act, he stops. He hears the sound of long, steady breathing. The boss has fallen fast asleep, a faint, satisfied smile gracing her lips. He shakes his head, preparing to move away from her, when she suddenly mutters the name Gu Xingqian. She whispers that she will definitely find him, leaving him stunned by the mention of his real-world name. He wonders how she could possibly know his true identity, or if he really is the husband of this boss. Since arriving in this strange world, fragments of memories have been returning to him at random intervals. He knows his name is Gu Xingqian, but everything else remains a blur, hidden behind a thick fog of uncertainty. He realizes that touching certain objects triggers these flashbacks, leaving him to wonder who he truly is. And more importantly, he wonders why he was brought to this place in the first place. The viewers in the chat are clearly disappointed, complaining that they haven't seen nearly enough of what they expected. One person grumbles that as a super member, they shouldn't be kept in the dark after waiting all night for some action. In the end, absolutely nothing happened, which, to be honest, is a bit of a letdown for everyone watching. We have to wonder what's going on. This was supposed to be a horror dungeon, yet the development feels a bit, well, different. It's all becoming a bit eerie. Gu Xingqian scratches his head, pushing down his confusion as he prepares to leave the room. Suddenly, his necklace falls to the floor with a soft click, revealing a photo of himself with the female boss. As he picks it up in shock, strange images flash through his mind. He taps his aching head and accidentally knocks over a painting. The frame hits the floor, and suddenly, a strange sound comes from the bookshelf as it slides open to reveal a secret room. He steps inside to find the walls covered in photos of himself, while videos of his own life play on a screen. Memories he had tried to bury begin to surface, like the time his parents passed away when he was only 6 years old. He remembers his uncle's family taking the insurance money and leaving him to wander the streets alone as a homeless child. We see him at 7, sent to an orphanage where the director mistreated him while he desperately tried to please potential adopters. By age 9, he was digging tunnels in a park just to survive. He watches these painful memories play out with a numb expression. But then, the blurred faces of his father and mother appear on the screen, and he breaks down, sobbing for all his lost years. He lets out all the bottled-up pain and grievance he has carried for so long, until the screen suddenly flickers and changes. A face that is both strange and familiar appears before him, a young girl with a delicate, beautiful countenance. She isn't cold and icy like she is now. Her eyes are filled with innocent wonder. It's her, the female boss as a child. In the video, she points at him and tells her mother that the little older brother looks so pitiful. It turns out the formidable boss was actually quite cute when she was little. After a long while, Gu Xingqian finally calms down. As he heads for the door, he finds a plate of braised pork, the very dish his mother used to make for him all those years ago. Eating this brings back memories of when he was starving on the streets, nearly dying, longing for this exact taste. The moment the savory juices burst in his mouth, he remembers his mother's warm embrace and his father's strong hands. As his father's hearty laughter echoes in his mind, large tears slide down his face while he devours the braised pork. In the chat, viewers are stunned, wondering if this kid is some kind of legendary high-spending player. They can't believe that a guy who was just being hunted by dozens of terrifying ghosts is now so calm. After such a narrow escape, he actually has the nerve to be this relaxed inside a deadly game world. One viewer asks if the others know that this female boss is rumored to be a violent psychopath. Apparently, her favorite thing is to keep her prey like pets, which is a terrifying thought, to say the least. She supposedly toys with them until they die. Reading these comments makes Gu Xingqian's blood run cold. He snaps back to reality, remembering that this is a horror dungeon, not a home. Yes, a very dangerous one. Because of that bowl of pork, he had almost entertained the terrifying idea of staying here forever. He tells himself he can't go on like this. He needs to regain his focus and keep moving. Deep down, he knows he must go and find his own friends. A memory surfaces of a voice saying, "Hello, let's get to know each other. My name is Lin Beishan." Lin Beishan had told him that since he saved him, they would be friends from then on. Friends, he wonders? It seems he really did have a friend in his memories once. "Hello," he had replied back then. "My name is Gu Xingqian," he had said, introducing himself for the very first time. We see the young boy, starving after a long day, standing there breathless and losing the strength to keep running. The boy tells his friend that he can't go any further and that he should be left behind to save himself. But his friend just tells him to climb on his back because they are friends, after all. "Hurry, there's no time. Faster," the white-haired boy shouts, moving toward Gu Xingqian's direction. His footsteps are eerie as he draws closer, until suddenly, the white-haired boy's expression shifts. With a look of pure malice, he reaches for Gu Xingqian's eyes and gives him a violent shove backward. He sneers that since they are friends, it isn't too much to ask for Gu Xingqian to sacrifice his life. Gu Xingqian asks himself how he could still believe in humanity after his aunt and uncle abandoned him for money. He recalls the orphanage director's hypocrisy and the cold, greedy faces hidden behind masks of kindness. He remembers the disgusted looks from strangers while he begged on the streets. Had he forgotten all of that? Now a terrifying ghost opens its massive maw, ready to swallow him whole in a single bite. "Have mercy, my lord. I ran too fast and didn't realize you were the one the boss was looking for." The ghost realizes he is the boss's beloved. Just as Gu Xingqian tries to speak, a figure appears before him. We see the ghost's eyes widen in pure terror as the female boss suddenly intervenes to protect her prize. She splits the creature in two as easily as a watermelon, sending black fluid splashing against the wall. The surrounding ghosts are so terrified by this display of power that they scramble away in total chaos. He reminds himself of the first rule of this horror game: never, under any circumstances, trust anyone. And then there is the second rule: every time a ghost devours a survivor, the hunt pauses. The chase will stop for exactly 5 minutes, a grim trade-off, to be perfectly honest. "Save me, I was wrong. We're friends, right? Gu Xingqian, please, save me," the boy screams. The white-haired boy wails that he isn't ready, that he doesn't want to die, not like this. Gu Xingqian looks at him coldly and simply says, "Fine, I will help you. I'll help you meet your end a little sooner," he decides, showing no mercy to the one who betrayed him. And here we learn the third rule of this terrifying horror game. In this place, there are no friends, only enemies waiting for the right moment. To be honest, for a moment there, we might have thought this newcomer was just a legendary fool who would let themselves be tricked a second time. And what exactly is that female protector doing? This clearly feels like cheating, as long as the stakes remain this high. When a villain is this beautiful, one's moral compass tends to spin right out the window. Our mysterious lady is simply kind-hearted in her own way, though some might disagree. Did everyone else miss the fact that she can rip a durian apart with her bare hands? Suddenly, the screen goes dark again, leaving everyone frustrated and demanding their money back. It has been a long time, Gu Xingchen, a familiar voice whispers through the gloom. She introduces herself as Gu Wanhua, and we see her face clearly now. As she draws closer, the air fills with a strange, lingering tension. But wait, there is more. He realizes with a start that it is Leiji, and a wave of relief washes over him. She is still alive. He remembers back to his time at the orphanage, when everything changed. A frail little girl had arrived, and by that afternoon, the other children had already cornered her. They demanded her food, threatening to beat her to death if she didn't hand it over. Through the crowd, he saw a pair of eyes he would never forget, eyes burning with the will to survive. She clung to a steamed bun as if it were her last hope, having gone without food for 3 days. Just then, the orphanage director appeared on the scene. He ran forward, but the girl, thinking he was another thief, desperately stuffed the bread into her mouth. She began to choke, and he quickly rushed to fetch the clean water he had hidden away in the room. He brought it out and began to feed the little girl, one small sip at a time. After a few rough coughs, the little girl finally managed to catch her breath and recover. He held his ground for a moment, half expecting her to bite his hand out of fear. Instead, she simply kept her hand near her mouth, watching him with wide, wary eyes. The little girl stared at him intently, her gaze never wavering for a single second. He didn't react, but a sudden wave of pity washed over him as she began to wolf down the bread again. He told her to eat slowly, assuring her that no one was going to take it away from her. When he asked for her name, she just lowered her head and stared at the ground in silence. He realized then that she was a lost soul just like him, so he introduced himself as Gu Xingchen. He told her his mother used to say that even the smallest stars in the sky are blooming with their own light. They shine to light the way for others, and if you gather all the stars in the sky together, they can illuminate the entire night. And since there were stars, he felt there should also be a moon. He decided then that her name would be Gu Wanhua, promising that the stars would always stay by her side. That way, the moon would never have to be lonely again, a sweet sentiment for such a dark place. The little girl just stared at him blankly, but over the next few days, he gained a tiny shadow. One day, the director took him to that dark room again for another session of abuse. It was a nightmare. When he finally stumbled out of the office, bruised and swollen, Gu Wanhua was there to support him. He confessed to her how exhausting it was to keep living this way, day after day. He tried to remember his mother's words, forcing a bright smile to radiate whatever light he had left. He spoke of lighting the way for others, but deep down, he was exhausted. He only dared to let his guard down at night. When he was alone, he finally allowed himself to weep, though he never made a sound for fear of waking the others. He missed his parents terribly, wondering if tearing everything apart would finally end this relentless cycle of pain. He wondered if that was the only way to see them again. Gu Wanhua remained silent, until she suddenly stood up. She prepared to rush toward the director's office, convinced that the old man was the source of all his suffering. She told him to wait while she went to kill him. It was the first time we see such a bloodthirsty look in her eyes. He had to restrain the violent Gu Wanhua, holding her tightly to stop her. In that moment, he finally understood something. He realized what it meant to truly depend on someone, that there was finally another person in this world who cared for him. Tears streamed down his face once more, but this time, they weren't born of pain, but of a strange sense of happiness. He knew then that he was no longer alone. He had found his third family member. From that day on, they were inseparable. Gu Wanhua became the person who knew him best in the entire world, even knowing his favorite meal was his mother's braised pork. Together, they faced every hardship the orphanage threw at them, standing as a united front against the world. They spent their time whispering and plotting, trying to find a way to escape their miserable circumstances. On the day of her birthday, a small moment of light arrived in that dark place. He handcrafted a necklace for her, containing a photo of their two smiling faces. A rare treasure, to be sure. Despite their small joys, the orphanage remained a dangerous cage, and they finally decided it was time to leave for good. One night, while everyone else was asleep, they dug a tunnel in the backyard and slipped away into the silence. Just as they were beginning to taste the hope of a new life, disaster struck when they least expected it. Human traffickers snatched them up, separating them and sending them to different corners of the country. They never saw each other again. Many years have passed since that night, but he has never stopped searching for her. He remains convinced she is out there. He was certain she was still alive, but he never imagined they would be reunited here in such an unexpected way. And then, the screen flickered back to life. How could this even be possible? We see the progress bar above the female boss's head showing she is already 80% conquered. This is unexpected. When exactly did this newcomer manage to charm the boss? And more importantly, how did he do it? Looking past the comments, we see Gu Wanhua. The once frail little girl has grown into a stunning, elegant woman. She is now a mature woman and a terrifying boss, while he is merely a small, inexperienced rookie who stumbled into her domain. He wondered why she was here and how she had ended up as an NPC in this game. To be honest, it made no sense. Before he could think it through, Gu Wanhua grabbed his hand and led him to that mysterious upstairs room, pushing him onto the bed. He propped himself up with his hands, retreating step by step across the mattress as Gu Wanhua approached him. She asked him what he was doing and why he was trying to hide from her. A fair question, really. She reminded him that they were family, and shouldn't family members sleep in the same bed? Her logic was unique. He stammered that he had always seen her as a sister, and that they simply couldn't do this. She leaned in, asking if he meant the kind of brother who does the things that adults do together. He tried to explain that wasn't what he meant at all, but she only smiled. She noted that while his mouth said no, his body seemed to be telling a much more honest story. It was a classic case of actions speaking louder than words. The viewers were losing their minds, joking that they couldn't handle the tension and were practically dying of thirst. Some wondered where they could find a sister like her, claiming this was far more exciting than any novel they had ever read. It was certainly a dramatic turn of events, to say the very least. She whispered, asking her brother if he really expected the woman to take the lead in a situation like this. She seemed to believe that in these matters, the brother should be the one to take the first step. She asked him if he was really going to make her wait any longer. Even a single moment felt like an eternity to her now. He felt his resolve crumbling as she drew closer, her presence overwhelming. The tension in the room was thick enough to touch. And then, the screen suddenly cut to black. The viewers were outraged, complaining that they had paid their hard-earned money only to stare at a dark screen. They wondered if this rookie could actually handle a boss who was known for tearing monsters apart with her bare hands. She was the ultimate powerhouse, and everyone was dying to know if he could keep up with her stamina. The only way to find out was to wait and see how long it would take for the broadcast to return. Was this really the reason they were forced to watch a black screen all night? But then, just as suddenly as it had vanished, the image flickered back to life. Gu Wanyue whispered, asking Achin if he truly loved her. He needed to wake up and stay sharp. We must remember that the woman standing before him is an epic-level, super-tier boss. No matter how much fun he had last night, he was warned never to say those 3 words. But he couldn't help himself. Our investigation into the game's mechanics reveals a terrifying truth about this situation. When that progress bar above the female boss's head hits 100%, he will be trapped forever. He would be a permanent prisoner of the game world, with no hope of ever leaving. Never able to leave? To be honest, that sounded like a dream come true to him. He told Wanyue he loved her, promising that the stars would always stay by the side of the moon. Since that day, they began a peaceful life together inside the horror game, while others were still fighting for survival. While others were trembling in fear, dodging the pursuit of horrors, he and Gu Wanyue were simply eating and sleeping together. To any outside observer, they looked exactly like a couple in the middle of a passionate romance. The viewers were bitter, claiming that showing off such affection would lead to a quick end, and some even threatened to go on blind dates out of spite. Others wrote that they hadn't provoked anyone and didn't deserve to be tortured by watching this love story instead of gameplay. They wondered why they had to endure such a display of affection while watching a horror broadcast. One viewer asked if our protagonist had forgotten that leaving the game alive would grant him a prize of 100 million. That is a staggering amount of money. After all, with that kind of wealth, he could find any woman he wanted. But Achin simply ignored the envious and hateful comments in the chat. What did they know? With the ultimate boss by his side in this world, he wasn't worried about missing out on a fortune. The days passed by one, until finally, only a single day remained before the game was scheduled to end. He was the last living soul left in the game. We have to wonder, was he truly prepared to stay in this digital world forever? The comments pleaded with him to come out and take the money first, which, to be fair, is a very practical suggestion. One viewer even joked that if he really didn't want the money, he could just hand it over to them. Another chimed in, saying that if they had to choose between 100 million and their true love, they would choose to stay together forever. It was a romantic sentiment, certainly, but not everyone agreed. Some called it a terrifying level of obsession, warning that only money would never betray you in the end. But there was a more pressing matter at hand that everyone seemed to be noticing. The progress bar above the female boss's head had still not reached 100%. If our memory serves us correctly, it was currently sitting at exactly 99%. Achin had actually asked Wanyue why the bar above her head refused to make that final jump to completion. When asked about that final 1%, she simply shook her head without answering. Deep down, Achin felt a growing sense of unease as he carried food from the kitchen. As he walked toward their private room, the horrific entities that usually slaughtered everything in sight simply bowed to him. One of them even stepped forward. With surprising politeness, the creature opened the door for him. He offered a small smile in return and stepped inside, expecting a quiet moment. He called out softly to his beloved, but the atmosphere in the room had shifted. Gu Wanyue murmured that she wanted to sleep just a little longer. The room was deathly quiet, or so it seemed at first. Suddenly, Wanyue snapped her eyes open, her gaze filled with an icy, impenetrable frost. It seemed she had sensed an intruder. She demanded that the filthy thing show itself. Achin stood frozen at the doorway, his eyes widening in shock as a figure emerged. It was the blonde-haired man, stepping out from behind him. He held a handgun pressed firmly against Achin's waist, a sinister smirk plastered on his face. The man gloated about the small fortune he'd spent on the Blackstone market to buy a resurrection card. It was a desperate move, certainly. He bragged about hiding for so long just for this specific moment, laughing hysterically at his own perceived brilliance. Wanyue coldly told him to take his filthy hands off Achin. The man only sneered, asking what she could possibly do to stop him. He bet that, according to the game rules, she was strictly forbidden from harming any of the survivors. He claimed to have watched them for days, noting that while she could kill monsters with her bare hands, she never touched a player. He laughed again, confident in his theory that she was bound by the system's constraints. And then, he pointed out something chilling. He asked if they noticed how quiet it had become, mocking the fact that her loyal monsters had suddenly vanished from the area. It turns out he hadn't just bought a life. He had also purchased an expensive defense card from the Blackstone market. This card created a barrier, keeping all monsters out of a 20 cubic meter space for 10 full minutes. A clever plan, in a twisted sort of way. He boasted that 10 minutes was more than enough time to accomplish his goals, like killing the person Manhwa cared for most. His plan was to eliminate the competition and claim the 100 million prize for himself. Then, a sudden, sharp sound echoed through the room. Achin was forced to the ground as blood began to pool slowly beneath him, spreading across the floor in a grim display. We see a moment of pure desperation as the scene unfolds. One might wonder if there is any way to use a resurrection card to save them now. But as it turns out, simply bringing someone back to life isn't always a permanent solution to their problems. There had to be another way to ensure they survived this nightmare. According to the hidden data, a new possibility was emerging. We learned that when a boss's conquest progress reaches 100%, they can choose to keep a bonded player in the game world forever. Alternatively, they can activate the life sacrifice mode, a choice that carries a heavy and immediate price. This mode allows the boss to take a player with them, though the game will end abruptly just 5 seconds later. It seemed like a tragic end was inevitable regardless of the choice. To be honest, the situation looked utterly hopeless. The thought of losing everything was too much to bear. No, there had to be a different outcome. Suddenly, the system detected that the bond between the player and the NPC had finally broken through the critical threshold. This triggered a hidden plotline with 2 distinct paths. Option 1. Keep Gu Xingqian in the game world for all eternity. Option 2. Sacrifice her own life to save Gu Xingqian and take him away from this digital hell. Without a moment's hesitation, she chose the second option. She was determined to take him with her, no matter the cost. The boss initiated the sacrifice mode, selecting player number 64 as the one to be saved and taken away. The system confirmed the selection, beginning the process of extracting player 64 from the game's grasp. And so, the final countdown began. There were only a few precious moments left before the game reached its absolute end. 5 seconds. That was all the time remaining. The realization hit them both. The game was truly ending. We see the world around them begin to fracture. As the clock ticked down, the reality they knew started to dissolve into digital mist. Every second felt like an eternity as the system prepared to shut down the entire world. The end was finally here. The game was closing, and with it, their time in this world was over. The countdown to the end of the game continued to tick away, marking the final moments of this digital reality. As the world dissolved, she realized that as long as one of them had the courage to live on, there would still be a chance for happiness, even if they couldn't see it yet. We find ourselves on a rooftop. Gu Xingqian looked at her in confusion, asking what she meant. Wanyu simply smiled and thanked him for giving her a name. She thanked him for giving her a home and whispered that in their next life, she still wanted to be his moon, shining softly over his world. And then, everything went dark. He slowly opened his eyes to find himself surrounded by white ceilings, white walls, and a sterile atmosphere. White sheets covered his bed, and not far away, a gaming helmet sat on a table. A voice called out, "Mr. Gu." The voice informed him that this was his 3,761st attempt, and he had failed again. He was bewildered. What did they mean by failure? Where was Wanyu? Where was Gu Wanyu? The attendant urged him to stay calm, noting that because he had been lying in bed for so long, his body would feel stiff for a while. His wife, he was told, was currently in the intensive care unit, so there was no need to worry. Everything was supposedly normal, but he wondered who this wife was. Was it Wanyu? When had they even married? To be honest, being in the intensive care unit hardly seemed like a normal situation to him. The attendant suggested that while his body readapted to reality, he should take a look at a specific file. Once he read it, everything would become clear. The voice in the recording began, "I know you are anxious and confused right now, but please, listen as I explain everything to you slowly. My name is Gu Xingqian. What I am about to tell you is the entire story regarding you and Gu Wanyu." It turned out that in the real world, Gu Wanyu was already his wife. This horror game was actually based on a novel that she had written. Years ago, after they were kidnapped by traffickers and separated, he had been forced to beg while at 10 years old. At 5 years old, he managed to escape those traffickers and led the police to their hideout. He immediately asked for news of Wanyu. The officers told him that many children taken by that gang had been killed. It seemed his beloved Wanyu was likely gone forever. Heartbroken, he wandered the crowded streets alone. Eventually, he simply collapsed on the sidewalk and began to sob uncontrollably. The family he had fought so hard to find had been taken from him once again. His vision went black, and he fainted right there. Passers-by simply avoided him, walking around his limp body. When he finally opened his eyes, dark clouds had gathered, and a drizzle began to fall. As the rain intensified, he felt he had nothing left to live for. He made his way to a rooftop, intending to jump and end his misery once and for all. But just as he prepared to take that final step, a hand suddenly yanked him back. He turned around to find the very person he thought he'd never see again, Wanyu. She explained that after being taken, she had tried everything to find him. Recently, she had seen a news report about the trafficker's arrest. Clinging to a final shred of hope, she searched every corner of the city for him, but found no trace of his presence. Despondent and losing the courage to go on, she had climbed to this very rooftop to end her own life. To be honest, it was a tragic coincidence. She hadn't expected to see him there, doing the exact same thing. She stopped him just in time, and he held her, weeping with relief. He told Wanyu everything he had endured over the years. Having found each other, they abandoned their dark thoughts and prepared to leave the roof. But then, a sudden gust of wind blew, and a bolt of lightning struck him directly on the head. He tumbled over the edge of the roof. Wanyu, desperate to save him, jumped after him without a second thought. Fortunately, the police had arrived and set up safety measures just in time. Miraculously, despite the lightning strike and the fall, he survived. From that day on, their luck finally began to turn. They passed a restaurant with a help wanted sign. The owner took pity on them and hired them both as workers. He started in the kitchen, learning to cook, while she worked as a waitress. Finally, they were no longer wandering the streets. They had a place to call home. Life gradually smoothed out for them. When he turned 18, he happened to learn from a lawyer that his guardians, his aunt and uncle, had no right to embezzle the insurance money his parents left behind. Now that he was an adult, he had the right to claim it. Armed with a lawyer's complaint, he took his aunt and uncle to court to demand the return of his insurance money. It was his parents' legacy, after all. Finally, the funds were back in his hands. He quietly left a generous sum of money for the restaurant owner who had helped them. Using the skills they had learned over the past 3 years, he and Wanyu opened their own restaurant in the city center. They named it the Crescent Bistro. They even bought a house, finally securing a place of their own in this once cold and indifferent city. His mother had been a renowned chef, and drawing from the memories of her cooking, he created a perfected version of braised pork. The dish was a massive hit with customers, even attracting television stations that competed to feature their story on the news. Business was booming. To commemorate the day their lives truly began again, they chose the anniversary of their fall from the rooftop to go to the Civil Affairs Bureau and get married. While he managed the restaurant, Wanyu dedicated herself to her studies. Through sheer determination and hard work, she eventually received a university admission letter. Wanyu chose to study writing, remembering how much her parents loved telling her bedtime stories. Her very first novel became an overnight sensation online, earning her a great deal of fame and recognition. A game company even contacted them, wanting to develop a brand new title based on the world Wanyu had created in her book. Everything was proceeding perfectly, but as we often see in these stories, tragedy was waiting just around the corner. A gang of robbers targeted them. On a dark and stormy night, masked men kidnapped Wanyu and demanded a ransom of 100 million to ensure her safety. He gathered every cent he and Wanyu had worked so hard to save, but it was nowhere near enough. To be honest, it was an impossible sum. Driven to desperation, he had no choice but to borrow a massive amount of money from high-interest loan sharks. He finally secured the 100 million and brought Wanyu back from the kidnappers. As they held each other, weeping with joy, he saw one of the kidnappers raise a gun and pull the trigger. Without thinking, he threw himself in front of Wanyu to shield her. She cried out his name, Chen, begging him not to die and leave her all alone in this world. He reached up a trembling hand, wanting only to wipe away her tears one last time. He tried to wipe away her tears, but they only flowed faster. He whispered an apology, feeling as though the star could no longer stay beside the moon. Even without him, he told her she had to find a way to keep living her life well. Wanyu begged him not to move, promising that he would be all right and that she would never let anything happen to him. After 72 hours of emergency surgery, we see that he didn't die, though his condition was barely better than death itself. The bullet had damaged his brain tissue, leaving him in a vegetative state, destined to spend the rest of his days confined to a bed. Wanyu refused to let go. However, through the glass of the ICU, she watched him breathe, her face drenched in tears. Returning home for supplies, she found several IOUs on the coffee table, alongside a divorce agreement he had prepared. There was also a legal statement severing her from his debts, claiming the high-interest loans were his personal responsibility alone. He had even prepared an insurance policy long ago, naming Wanyu as the sole beneficiary. To be honest, he had planned for everything but his own survival. In the days that followed, Wanyu came to the hospital every single day to care for him. She spoke to him constantly, recounting everything they had experienced together, hoping against hope that her voice might finally wake him up. Meanwhile, the game Wanyu developed became a massive success. One day, the production team approached her with a proposal. They explained that a new collaborative project with a medical school had reached a major breakthrough. It involved a simple, yet bold idea. By placing a gaming helmet on a patient, they could connect the person's neural pathways directly into a virtual world. Through the intense stimulation of that digital realm, it might be possible to awaken a patient from a deep vegetative coma. To succeed, someone with a profound bond must enter the game world to locate the patient's fragmented memory core. They would have to help the patient remember their real life bit by bit, ensuring the memory core remained completely intact throughout the process. Only then would there be a chance. However, in a game world, the patient would have no memory of their actual reality. It would require the person closest to them to patiently reawaken those lost feelings, one step at a time. Wanyu didn't need to hear another word. She would go, no matter the cost, to bring her Chen back to the world of the living. The team assured her that while the task of awakening Chen was dangerous, they would do everything possible to ensure her safety. They would set her as an NPC within the game, granting her the maximum level of authority and freedom possible in that digital realm. However, she was forbidden from attacking other players. Instead, she could command the strange, eerie entities of the game world at will. This power was meant to help her find her husband, though they warned her that because the technology was still in its infancy, she had to remember one vital thing. If she died within the game world, her physical life would be in grave danger. Wanyu whispered Achin's name over and over like a prayer, promising herself that she would find him no matter what. As it turned out, Wanyu truly did succeed in waking him, but in a cruel twist of fate, she fell into a permanent coma herself. Her vital signs were incredibly weak, yet miraculously, they didn't disappear entirely. She was still there, in a way. She lay there silently, her face as pale as paper, with various life support tubes connected to her fragile body. The game company and the technical team were at a total loss. After her consciousness scattered in the game world, it simply vanished. Her mind could not reform, and she sank into a coma far deeper than the vegetative state Achin had once endured. Wanyu was lost on a purely spiritual level. Achin found himself wondering why everyone he loved seemed to slip through his fingers. He asked himself why he was being forced to live in this world all alone. It felt like a punishment he didn't deserve. He sought out the game designers, begging for their help. If they could use a game to wake a vegetative man like him, then surely they could use that same method to bring his Wanyu back to him. The staff looked at him gravely, telling Mr. Gu that even if he hadn't come to find them, they would have sought him out. According to their investigations over the last few days, they had discovered something quite unusual. He asked what it was. Ever since Wanyu chose to self-destruct within the game, the world had collapsed, but during the subsequent repairs, they discovered that her memory fragments might actually still exist somewhere deep within the game's code. He immediately asked if he could go in to bring her back. In theory, they told him it was possible. However, they explained that he would need to relive the same story scenarios again. If he could somehow change the ending of Miss Ku's sacrifice, perhaps she could finally wake up. But because he was re-entering a world he had already experienced, the moment he stepped into the game, he would lose all of his memories. As for how he would wake her while remembering nothing, the team admitted they couldn't help him with that. It was a leap of faith, to be honest. The staff noted that this was already his 3,761st attempt to wake his wife. They asked if he truly wanted to try again. He told them that as long as there was a single chance, he would never stop trying. And so, he began once more. 10 years had passed since his first attempt, and yet, he had failed every single time. He returned to her side, feeling the weight of those years. He whispered to Wanyu that he was back and would never give up, begging her to just open her eyes and look at him. Countless images of their shared past flashed through his mind. We see them at 6 years old, back in the orphanage. Every time he turned around, he could see little Wanyu standing just a short distance away, watching over him. She told him not to get the wrong idea. She was only following him to protect him because he had saved her that day. She insisted she wasn't doing it just to be his friend. A classic defense, of course. At 9, they escaped the orphanage together only to be caught by traffickers. At the moment they were forced apart, she gripped his hand tightly. When he was 15, she pulled him back from the edge of a rooftop. He held her and sobbed while she gently stroked his back. By 18, they were working at the Xinyue restaurant. He stood in the kitchen while she was at the front, and they smiled at each other through the glass. They looked like fools, perhaps, but they were happy. Eventually, he placed a ring on Wanyu's finger with his own hands. He promised her then that the stars would always stay by the moon's side. It was a vow he intended to keep. As the memories faded, he looked down at the ring on Wanyu's ring finger. He spoke her name softly, his voice trembling. He asked her to wait for him just a little longer. He was certain, one way or another, that he would bring her back.